The lights were blinding. Red and blue strobe flashes against the dark Texas sky, casting eerie shadows on the gravel driveway that had once felt like home. I remember the crunch of boots, the thud of car doors slamming shut, the metallic echo of a loudspeaker tearing through the still air. "Step away from the gates, sir. This is an official order." My hands were steady, though my heart pounded like I was back in a burning building, dragging some kid out of a third-story window. I didn't move. I looked those officers dead in the eyes and said 6 words that would change the course of everything. "This is private land. Go home." They didn't expect defiance. Not from a man like me. 60-something, retired, gray in the beard and limping from an old injury. They expected a grumble, a mutter, maybe a nod of surrender. What they didn't expect was me standing firm behind a reinforced cattle gate with a lock that could hold back a truck, and had, just the night before. They didn't know the story yet. They hadn't seen the pasture torn in half, the illegal road bisecting my land like a wound. They didn't know my mare, Ember, had been hurt when someone barreled through the first gate, sending my horses scattering like frightened children. They didn't know the faces of the men who stood behind all this war HOA name tags and fake neighborly smiles, and maybe, just maybe, they didn't care. I wasn't some paranoid loner. I wasn't waving a gun or screaming on social media. I was a man who had paid off every inch of this land with blood and broken bones. I was a firefighter for 27 years, retired only when a roof collapse cracked 3 vertebrae and stole the rest of my mobility. I came out here to heal. Bought this ranch from the hands of my father, who bought it from his father. My kids grew up running wild through these fields, climbing that old oak tree where my dad's ashes rest now. And I built this life, every inch of it, with calloused hands and aching knees. So when a bunch of newcomers in khakis and golf shirts decided that my land was a shortcut, something they could carve through like cake at a fundraiser, they didn't realize they were waking up something they couldn't put back to sleep. The truth is, this didn't start with the road. The road was the symptom. The cancer started months before, when Ridgeway Estates first popped up next to my western fence line. A real estate developer from Austin bought the plot, cut it into pieces like cheap pie, and sold it to folks looking for country charm with community perks. They built their curved driveways and solar lampposts, held potlucks behind their iron gates, and formed a homeowners association like it was the HOA that gave them the right to be here. I didn't care. I really didn't. They had their rules, their meetings, their newsletters. I had my land, my horses, and my peace. That was the deal. Until the day I saw bulldozers on my pasture. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Maybe the county accidentally authorized something. Maybe someone got turned around. I walked out, slow from the pain, but steady. And what I saw stopped me cold. 3 men in orange vests, machines tearing a line through the lower field, and standing with a clipboard was Curtis, the HOA president, smiling like a man who just peed on your boots and called it rain. "Can I help you?" he asked. Not like a neighbor, but like a security guard. Like I was the trespasser. "You tell me," I said, pointing at the trail of destruction. "What the hell is that doing on my land?" He didn't even blink. "Oh, that? That's the new access road. We voted last week, connects our east gate to Route 17. Much safer for school buses and emergency vehicles. You'll love it. Raises your property value." "Raises my property value?" That's the line they all use, isn't it? Like it's some kind of magic spell that justifies theft. He didn't ask, didn't notify, didn't so much as leave a note on my gate. He talked like he had a right. Like I should be thanking him. That smug OA logic that turns public good into private greed. I said, "This is my land, Curtis. You don't have an easement. You don't have a permit. You didn't even knock on my damn door." He shrugged. "Eminent domain, Jack. Look it up." And oh, I did. My wife Emily is a paralegal, sharp as a cactus and twice as painful when you lie to her. She pulled deeds, maps, survey lines, and county records faster than you can say civil lawsuit. That road? It wasn't on any official map. No easement. No filing. No nothing. It wasn't just sneaky, it was illegal. So I locked the gate. Reinforced steel, camera, padlock. I put up signs every 10 feet, private property. No trespassing. Violators will be prosecuted. And wouldn't you know it, that same night, someone rammed it with a pickup and tore part of my fence down. Left a note taped to my mailbox, enjoy your little protest. You'll hear from our lawyers. 2 days later, I did. A lawsuit from the HOA claiming I was blocking public access. They called it a right-of-way violation. Claimed I was endangering children and impeding emergency services. They painted me like a villain. On social media and flyers, even in the damn local paper. Ranch owner endangers school children in road dispute. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at my kitchen table running my fingers over old photos of my dad standing right where that illegal road now cut through. I thought about the values he taught me. Kindness, respect, standing your ground when you know you're right. But what do you do when liars wear suits? When thieves call themselves community leaders? You fight. I started logging everything. Dates, plates, times, footage from trail cams and drones. Emily contacted an attorney in San Antonio. We hired a private land surveyor. I knew I was in for a long war, but I also knew this. I wasn't backing down. Not for Curtis. Not for any HOA. Not even for a dozen squad cars with lights blaring like I was robbing Fort Knox. And that brings us back to that night. Me standing at the gate, the cops ordering me to move. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't threaten. I simply said, every member of that HOA is banned from my land. You step 1 foot past this gate and I will prosecute. Then Emily stepped out, folder in hand, maps, deeds, GPS surveys, notarized copies of the cease and desist order she'd filed that morning. Her voice calm, measured, cutting through the noise like a blade through fog. I suggest y'all look at these documents before you make a mistake you can't undo. For the first time, they looked uncertain. And in that moment, standing there with my wife beside me, our land behind us, and a line in the dirt drawn clear as day, I realized something. This wasn't just a fight about property. This was about dignity, about the kind of world we're leaving behind, about whether men like me, men who've spent a lifetime building something with their hands, get to decide what happens on the land we bled for. I know there are other men out there like me. Maybe you're sitting in a cabin in Montana or a farm outside Tulsa. Maybe you don't trust lawyers. Maybe you're tired of government overreach, HOA bullies, and city folk who think open land is just wasted space waiting for condos. But hear me, we are not alone. They may have drones. They may have lawyers. They may have shiny brochures and sweet smiling realtors. But we have memory. We have history. And we have resolve. This isn't the end of the road. Hell, it's not even the middle. But I know this. If they think they can bulldoze men like me into silence, they're in for a surprise. Because I may be old, but I'm still here. I'm still standing. And this land still answers to me. I didn't know how fast a man could go from defending his land to being labeled a public threat until I saw my name printed in bold, slanted letters in the local newspaper. Standoff rancher puts children at risk in access dispute. The paper didn't even call me by name, just local landowner, like I was some anonymous old crank waving a shotgun at the future. The photo they used was an old one from a county fair, me scowling in the sun while squinting at a weather report on my phone. They framed me like a lunatic. A last stand of some outdated generation. And if I'm being honest, that's what hit me hardest. Not the lawsuit, not the vandalism, not even the broken fence and the injured mayor. No, it was realizing how fast a man's whole life could be reduced to a caricature just because he said no to the wrong people with too much money. Curtis and his HOA didn't stop after the road. That was just the opening move in a game I hadn't even agreed to play. After the cease and desist order, they escalated. They held emergency HOA meetings and passed around flyers accusing me of hostile behavior and interfering with community safety. One flyer had a crude map showing the blocked emergency route in red, with my name printed in bold like I was a terrorist. Then came the online campaign, posts on the Ridgeway community page claiming I was a danger to school children, that my unstable behavior had triggered law enforcement responses. They made it sound like I threatened someone with a rifle. I hadn't. I hadn't even raised my voice. Emily warned me it would get ugly. She's always been the one who sees around corners. She dug deeper, spent nights cross-referencing land records and HOA bylaws, then found something that turned her stomach. The Ridgeway HOA had submitted a document to the county 2 months prior, listing an abandoned strip of land adjacent to their eastern boundary as a right-of-way. That abandoned land? It was mine, my registered, taxed, documented property. They had labeled it as vacant space, and because someone at the county clerk's office hadn't cross-verified ownership, the file sat unchallenged. Curtis and his crew had bet on our silence. They figured I wouldn't notice until it was too late. But I wasn't built for silence, so I pushed back, harder this time. We contacted the county ourselves. Our attorney filed a formal complaint and a second cease and desist. Then I set up motion-activated cameras at every access point. Not just trail cams, the good stuff, weatherproof with night vision and cloud backup. Emily called in a favor from an old law school buddy who worked in real estate fraud. By the end of that week, we had a thick stack of evidence. Drone footage showing Ridgeway residents using our land as a shortcut, timestamps from school buses entering without permission, even HOA trucks parked half on my pasture like it was a damn loading zone. Still, that wasn't what finally made me snap. No, that came the night someone cut our east fence line clean through. 4 strands of barbed wire snipped like ribbon, leaving a wide, open corridor between Ridgeway and my pasture. I found the gap just before dawn after waking to Ember whinnying like something was wrong. She and 2 others had wandered dangerously close to the road. Another 5 minutes and we might have had a dead horse and another headline blaming me. I patched the line myself, hands trembling from anger more than age. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the barn with a thermos of coffee and a rifle across my lap, watching shadows crawl across the gravel, waiting. 2 days later, we found a new note, this time pinned to a fence post with a knife. Black marker, all caps, this isn't over. Emily paled when she read it. I told her we'd seen worse during wildfires, during riots. But deep down, I knew this wasn't the kind of fight I was trained for. This wasn't a fire you could smother or a wound you could bandage. This was sabotage disguised as paperwork. This was war by reputation. That's when I changed tactics. If they wanted a public image war, fine. I'd give them one. I sat down and wrote my story. Not a rant, not a threat, just the truth. I wrote about the road, about the lies, about how I grew up riding the same trails that were now being paved over by people who thought land was just square footage. Emily helped me clean it up, checked for legal liability. Then I posted it everywhere, Reddit, Facebook, the local community group, even emailed it to the editor of that same newspaper that smeared me. I didn't ask for sympathy. I didn't play the victim. I just showed people what was happening. And it hit like a spark to dry grass. Within 48 hours, the post had over 10,000 shares. Comments poured in from ranchers in Colorado, homeowners in Nevada, Vietnam vets from Arizona. People told their own stories of HOAs finding them for flags, of developers stealing land through forged easements, of being bulldozed by bureaucracy. One guy from Idaho wrote, "You're not crazy, Jack. You're just the first one to say it out loud." And I realized then, this wasn't just my fight anymore. That week, we got our first visitor, Channel 8 News out of Austin, then Channel 5, then a podcast. They all came with cameras and soft voices wanting to hear the story of the stubborn old rancher who stood up to the shiny, smiling future. I told them the truth. They recorded me standing by that steel gate, Ember grazing behind me, and I said, "This land is mine. Not for sale, not for lease. And sure as hell not for theft." One clip went viral. That's when the death threats started. I got phone calls in the middle of the night. One voicemail just played the sound of heavy breathing. Another said, "You better sleep with one eye open, cowboy." We forwarded everything to the sheriff. They opened a file, took statements, but no arrests, no warnings, no real protection. Then came the kids. One evening, I caught 3 of them, late teens, probably from Ridgeway, sneaking around the barn with spray cans and lighters. I stepped out with my flashlight and shouted. They bolted. One dropped his backpack. Inside, rags soaked in gasoline, a half-used flare, and a lighter with a Ridgeway HOA keychain. I handed it over to the sheriff. He said they'd look into it. A week passed. Nothing. No arrests. No charges. That's when Emily lost it. She stood in the kitchen holding one of our no trespassing signs that had been ripped in half and scrawled with the words "Get out" in red spray paint. Her voice cracked. "Jack, they're trying to break us." I told her they'd picked the wrong damn people to intimidate. She just nodded and said, "Then let's break them first." So we did. Emily filed a restraining order, not just against Curtis, but the entire HOA board. Our lawyer followed up with a civil suit, trespassing, property damage, emotional distress. We added video, timestamps, the gas-soaked backpack, every single violation. Then we filed a request for an exclusive protective easement, one that would ban anyone from Ridgeway from stepping a toe past our property line under threat of arrest. It wasn't easy, but we had something stronger than leverage. We had truth. That weekend, I found myself standing in front of a packed town hall meeting. Farmers, teachers, Vietnam vets, all of them with the same look I'd had in the mirror for weeks, tired, angry, and fed up. I told them what Curtis did, what the Ridgeway HOA tried. And I ended with this: they think men like us won't fight because we're old, because we limp, because our hands shake. But let me tell you something. My hands may tremble, but they still work. They still build. And when they need to, they still hold the line. The room stood up, applauded. And in that moment, I knew they woke the wrong generation. I thought I'd seen the worst of it when the HOA smeared my name in the paper and sent teenagers with gasoline to burn my barn. But nothing prepared me for the moment I opened that crisp white envelope left on my front gate post. No stamp, no return address, just the words Coleman Ranch scribbled in tight mechanical letters. Inside was a single drone photograph of my home, taken from above. A thick red X slashed over the rooftop, and underneath it, scrawled in black ink like a death rattle, "You're not safe yet." I just stood there on the porch, my coffee cooling in my hand, staring at that photo like it was a sniper scope frozen in time. Emily walked out, saw my face, and didn't need to ask. She knew. And I'll never forget how her voice trembled when she whispered, "Jack, they're still watching us." The sheriff came that afternoon, took the envelope into evidence, dusted it for prints. Nothing. No DNA. No footprints. Whoever left it knew what they were doing. It wasn't a bluff. It was a message. This wasn't about a road anymore. This wasn't even about land. This was a battle for control, for dominance. And to them, we weren't neighbors. We were obstacles. But I'd spent my life charging into burning buildings. I didn't scare easy. I didn't bend. I fought flames with my own hands and pulled people out of hell more times than I can count. If they wanted war, they just declared it on the wrong man. What they didn't know was that I'd been preparing. While Emily was building the legal case, I was building something else, something slower, deeper, and stronger. A network. I reached out to every rancher within 50 miles who had tangled with developers. I found veterans who had been pushed out by zoning scams, old-timers who lost family land to corporate redevelopment, widows who didn't understand the papers they signed until it was too late. I listened. I wrote it all down. Then I connected the dots. And in every story, there was one name that kept surfacing like a rotting log in a flooded river: Troy Maddox. Troy was a developer, slick, smooth, and silent. You didn't see him until the check was already cashed. He didn't run HOAs, he funded them. He didn't build homes. He sold blueprints to city councils and watched the value climb. He was the man behind Ridgeway Estates, the same man who showed up at that first Ridgeway barbecue in a navy blazer, sunglasses at dusk, holding a lemonade and flashing a smile that never touched his eyes. I remembered shaking his hand. It felt like closing a deal you didn't know you'd made. Curtis was just a pawn. Sandra Beck, the HOA president who skipped town with the money, she was his puppet. Maddox was the one pulling strings. I had names. I had documents. I had motive. All I needed was proof. So I made a call. Will Johnson, an old buddy of mine from the fire service who'd become a private investigator. Will owed me. Years ago, during a barn fire up north, I'd pulled his horses out one by one while his family watched helpless from the road. He hadn't forgotten. When I told him about Maddox, about the forged easements, the arson, the threats, the drone, he didn't hesitate. I'm on it, he said, and 3 days later, he was back with a thick manila folder that would make any prosecutor's hand shake with excitement. Maddox had priors, lawsuits in 3 states, charges dropped under suspicious circumstances, settlements sealed behind NDAs. He'd bulldozed wetlands in Nevada, falsified zoning maps in Arizona, paid off 2 council members in New Mexico. And now he had his sights set on Texas, on my ranch, my family, my legacy. Emily took that folder and filed a motion. We didn't just go after the Ridgeway HOA anymore, we went after Maddox himself. Filed for an emergency injunction, attached sworn affidavits, dropped names, added video of Curtis confessing that Maddox promised him a payout if he played along. It was enough. Judge Daniels, God bless that man, slammed the gavel and froze every single Ridgeway-related development permit within the county. Troy Maddox was officially barred from setting foot on Coleman Ranch. His companies flagged for review. His name became toxic in every real estate office from Dallas to Houston. And I stood in court with my boots still dusty from morning chores and said, this isn't just about me. It's about all of us. The crowd outside the courthouse roared, but Maddox didn't flinch. As he walked past me, he leaned in just enough to say, you think this ends with me? Then he smiled, and for the first time in my life, I understood what it felt like to be stared at by a predator. A week later, the letter came. Not from Troy, not from the HOA, but from something worse, the Federal Land Bureau of Development. A crisp type notification stating that my ranch had been identified as priority land for Project 17A, a proposed federal infrastructure corridor. They weren't demanding yet, just inviting voluntary coordination. Emily read it 3 times, her face hardening with each pass. I didn't need to ask. We both knew what this was. It was the government's version of eminent domain without the decency to call it by name. First they ask, then they survey, then they pave. I stood there on my porch, same spot where I first held that drone photo, and stared out at the fields where my father taught me to ride, where my kids chased cattle with sticks pretending they were cowboys, where my wife cried the night we lost our first foal. And I knew I wasn't letting this go. Not now. Not ever. So we turned our next move into a movement. We called the media, showed them every document, every threat, every court ruling. We walked them through scorched earth where the barn used to be. We showed them Ember's healed leg and told them how she nearly died because some kid thought it was fun to play arsonist. We turned the story viral again. But this time, we added a face to the fight, a movement, a cause. We started a GoFundMe. Protect our land, protect our future. Donations poured in, letters from across the country. One came from a World War II vet in Wyoming. They pushed me off my land in '64. I've waited 50 years for someone to stand up. Don't stop, Jack. Then came the big one. A call from Texas State Senator Dolores Ray. She'd seen our story. She'd seen the headlines. And she had an idea. Jack, she said, I want to introduce a bill. The Landowner Protection Act. I want to make sure what happened to you can't happen to anyone else. I said, Senator, I ain't never written a law, but I'll sign that one with blood if I have to. The bill gained traction fast. Our story hit national news. Maddox's empire collapsed. Ridgway dissolved. And I thought maybe, just maybe, the fire was finally out. But that night, as Emily and I stood on the porch, watching the wind bend the grass under the moonlight, a black SUV rolled up to our gate. A man in a gray suit stepped out. He held another envelope, white and clean like the first, and said 4 words that made my blood run cold. You've been served again. This time, the sender wasn't Ridgway. It wasn't Maddox. It was the federal government. A new petition claiming emergency public access was required. That even with the ruling, even with the easement, they intended to review the viability of reinstating access through Coleman Ranch. Emily whispered it before I could. They're still coming. And I nodded, gripping the paper like a rope slipping through my calloused hands. But this time I didn't feel alone. I had Will. I had Emily. I had veterans and teachers and ranchers and a whole country behind me. They burned my barn, but they lit a fire in me. And now I wasn't just defending a fence. I was defending a legacy, a history, a home. And they were about to learn old cowboys don't quit. We dig in. We hold the line. And when the dust settles, we're still standing. The sun hadn't even cleared the ridge when the call came in. It was Curtis. Not his voice exactly. He was calling from the county jail, and you could tell it hurt his pride to be the one on the other end of that collect call. He sounded like a man who had finally seen the walls closing in, like a dog who used to bark behind a gate, but now found himself in a cage he couldn't chew through. His voice was low, cautious, maybe even ashamed. He didn't start with hello, didn't bother with pleasantries. He just said, Jack, it wasn't me. Not all of it. For a second, I thought he was just trying to save his own skin. But then he said the name again, Troy Maddox, and suddenly everything snapped into focus, like the way a fire whips into shape once the wind hits. He's the one, Jack. He planned it all. The road, the threats, the drone, even the kids. He told me I'd be safe. Said the law wouldn't touch me if I stayed quiet. But now I'm sitting here in a 6x9, and he's out there still walking free. Is that fair to you? It wasn't. Not even close. Curtis gave me more in 5 minutes than months of digging had ever uncovered. Troy hadn't just manipulated the HOA, he'd manufactured it. Ridgway Estates wasn't a community. It was a facade. A front. A mechanism for land acquisition masked in suburbia. He'd bought up the plots under shell companies, installed board members he could control, and even recruited buyers from his own inner circle, people who owed him favors or feared his reach. The HOA was never about community guidelines or keeping lawns neat. It was a pressure valve, a battering ram dressed in legalese, and I was the one he meant to break. Curtis gave me names, real ones. Folks with government connections, fake business licenses, backdoor deals that made your blood go cold. I hung up and called Will, my investigator buddy, and told him everything. He didn't hesitate. I've seen this before, Jack, he said. Maddox is old school organized crime with a white collar. He doesn't need guns. He's got influence. But now we've got him. And we did. Emily compiled everything. Curtis's statement, the new names, fresh surveillance footage, even a bank ledger that linked Ridgway O funds to a Maddox development subsidiary out of Tulsa. We brought it to the feds this time, not just the county. An old friend of mine from my days training with Fire Rescue Tactical Response worked with the Texas Attorney General's office. I called in a favor I'd been saving since 1983. He didn't make promises, but he listened, and by the end of the week, there was a task force looking into Maddox's entire operation. But Troy Maddox didn't go quietly. A few days later, I was out fixing a busted gate post when I noticed a white SUV parked half a mile down the road. It didn't belong to anyone I knew. Every time I turned my back, it seemed a few feet closer. That night, our motion lights flicked on 3 separate times. No animal tracks. No wind, just a silent reminder that someone was watching. Emily started sleeping with her .38 on the nightstand again. And I stopped sleeping much at all. Then came the drone. Again. Not just one this time, but three, buzzing like mosquitoes over our roofline, snapping pictures we couldn't stop. I called the sheriff. He shrugged, said there was no clear ordinance on drones at that altitude. We can't shoot 'em, Jack, he said, like that settled the matter. So I got creative. Called up an old buddy of mine from the Marine Corps who'd taken up falconry. Yeah, falconry. He brought over his best bird, a beautiful Harris's hawk named Liberty. Within a week, Liberty had taken down two of those drones in midair like they were nothing more than noisy pigeons. I mounted the wreckage on my fence like war trophies. Sent the message clear. You fly over this ranch, you better be ready to lose something expensive. Still, the biggest blow wasn't one I delivered. It came from inside Maddox's own fortress. One of his former employees, a woman named Janice who handled financial filing, saw our story on the news. She reached out anonymously at first, just an email with a burner address. She said she couldn't sleep anymore, not after what she'd helped cover up falsified property surveys, bribed land appraisers, sealed settlement payouts to families who never even knew what they'd signed away. We agreed to meet, quiet-like, in the back of an old diner up in Weatherford. She was scared, shaking. But she brought a flash drive. When I plugged it into my laptop back at the ranch, I swear I felt the weight of generations lift from my chest. It was all there. Documents tying Maddox to forged land acquisition plans, signatures that didn't match, payments funneled through ghost LLCs, even a voice recording where he laughed and said, "If that old bastard doesn't sell, we'll just bleed him dry with lawyers." Emily cried when she heard that. Not because it hurt, but because it proved everything we knew and no one believed. She looked at me, jaw tight, and said, "We're going to bury him." We sent the flash drive to every journalist we trusted, every legal contact, every politician who ever shook our hands and smiled for a photo op. Within 48 hours, it exploded. News networks picked it up. Senators demanded investigations. Maddox was subpoenaed. His company's stock dropped like a stone. And just like that, the suits disappeared. No more late-night cars parked down the road. No more drones. No more anonymous envelopes. Like rats deserting a sinking ship, Maddox's allies vanished, resigned, or flipped. But I wasn't done. I filed a petition to reclaim damages, not just financial, but symbolic. I wanted Ridgeway Estates torn down. Their clubhouse? I wanted it leveled and replaced with open land. Their roads? I wanted them dug up and the soil replanted with native prairie. I wasn't looking for revenge. I was looking for restoration, for justice that reached beyond the courtroom and touched the land itself. Some said I was going too far, that I'd made my point, that I'd won. But they didn't know what it felt like to wake up every morning and wonder if today's the day they take another inch from you. They didn't know what it meant to walk the field where your father taught you how to saddle a horse and see a for sale sign someone else had planted in your soil. This wasn't about a road. It was about a line, one they crossed, and one I was drawing in return. And maybe that's why, when the federal representative showed up on my doorstep again, this time with a smile and a file-marked land reclassification proposal, I didn't slam the door. I invited him in, sat him down, poured him coffee, then told him, plain and slow, "You see that hill out there? That's where my dad built our first fence. You want to build through it? You're going to have to tear me down first." He didn't argue. He just nodded. And for the first time in months, I felt the air shift. Not in surrender, but in recognition. Because the government knew now what Maddox didn't. That old men like me don't get tired. We get sharper, meaner, and a hell of a lot more dangerous when cornered. The morning the final notice arrived, the air tasted like copper, dry, metallic, sharp in the back of my throat. Emily stood by the window, her shoulders drawn tight as barbed wire. The envelope was thicker than usual, marked with a red federal seal and a long serial number like it had already passed through more hands than a $20 bill. I sliced it open with my old pocket knife, the same one my father used to skin deer and open seed sacks. Inside was not a threat, not a lawsuit, not even a formal warning. It was an invitation. A roundtable meeting hosted by the Department of Federal Infrastructure Development, scheduled at the county courthouse. I was the guest of honor, or maybe the target. Emily read it over my shoulder. You think it's legit? She asked, voice low. I nodded. Oh, it's real all right. They're trying to look civil now that the whole country's watching. Because by now, the war over my land wasn't a small town story. It was national. After the arrest of Curtis, the exposure of Sandra, and the downfall of Troy Maddox, folks across the country had rallied. I'd received letters from Maine to Montana, ranchers, veterans, retirees, all saying the same thing. We're with you, Jack. The hashtag #StandWithJack had been printed on banners, bumper stickers, even a mural someone painted on the side of a grain silo in Kansas. The Landowner Protection Act was under Senate review. But none of that meant the machine had stopped. The government didn't bleed like Maddox did. It didn't panic or confess or skip town. It played the long game. Quiet, clean, legal. They weren't going to steal my land in the dead of night. They were going to do it under the glow of courtroom fluorescence, with polite words and hollow smiles. That's how empires erase people. Paper by paper, signature by signature, until you're a footnote. But I wasn't ready to be a footnote. Not yet. At the courthouse, the room was colder than I expected. Not just the temperature, though it felt like they kept it refrigerated to preserve whatever humanity might still be left in the bureaucracy, but the air itself. Sterile, lifeless, like truth had no place there. There were 4 suits at the far end of the table, one young woman with a laptop, typing fast enough to crack granite, 2 men in matching ties, tight smiles that didn't reach their eyes, and one older gentleman who introduced himself as Director Alan Reed. Mr. Coleman, he said, thank you for coming. We appreciate your time. I didn't shake his hand. Just pulled out the chair across from him and sat down. Emily stayed standing. She didn't need to say anything. Her presence said enough. Reed slid a glossy packet across the table. This is the preliminary layout for the 17A corridor. You'll note your property lies directly in the projected development arc. I didn't touch it. You mean you're still trying to run a damn freeway through my pasture? He smiled, thin as a paper cut. We prefer the term high-speed interregional connector. It will link commerce centers, create thousands of jobs, and provide vital infrastructure support. I leaned back. By wiping out what little land's left for families like mine? You think slapping a fancy name on it makes it righteous? The man on Reed's left, probably some legal advisor, cleared his throat. Mr. Coleman, we're not here to strong-arm anyone. This is an open dialogue. We're prepared to offer compensation well above market rate. You think money replaces history? I shot back. You think a check makes it right that my father's ashes are buried under that oak tree? That my grandson learned to ride a horse in that pasture? That my wife and I spent 30 years turning that ranch into something sacred? I could feel my pulse climbing, a slow rumble building behind my ribs like thunder rolling across dry plains. Reed folded his hands. Jack, he said, too familiar now. I understand your attachment, but progress must have room to grow. The needs of the many... No, I snapped. Don't you dare quote Spock to me. This ain't science fiction. This is my life. Emily placed a hand on my shoulder, grounding me, steadying the fire. I took a breath, cold and bitter in my lungs. You already saw what happened when developers tried to steamroll me. I buried them in court. You want the same fight? Reed sighed, like a man disappointed his child hadn't learned the lesson yet. The government isn't the HOA, Mr. Coleman. We don't break laws. I smiled then, wide, humorless. No. You just bend them until they snap. We left the meeting without agreeing to anything. No signatures. No promises. Just a deeper understanding they were coming, and I was ready. That night, I went online, not to vent, but to organize. I launched a campaign, Keep Coleman Free. Not just a hashtag, a movement. We built a new website, uploaded every document, every map, every drone video. A live counter tracked how many acres across Texas were under threat from federal development. We partnered with veteran groups, rancher associations, even a retired judge who'd seen similar cases unfold quietly in Arizona. I wasn't just fighting for my ranch anymore. I was fighting for every man who ever built a life with calloused hands and the dirt of his father's land under his nails. A week later, the first buses rolled in. Not federal. Ours. People. Americans. They came in waves. Teachers, coal miners, rodeo clowns, war widows, native veterans from New Mexico. They pitched tents on the edge of my property, built watchtowers out of scrap wood and old ladders. It wasn't a militia. It was a community made flesh. They called it Camp Liberty. Local news covered it. Then state. Then CNN showed up. I stood by the old barn, rebuilt and freshly painted red, and gave an interview. The reporter asked, "Jack, are you afraid of retaliation?" I looked into the camera and said, "No, I'm afraid of silence. I'm afraid of good men sitting still while the land gets stolen out from under our boots. I'm afraid of grandsons never knowing what it means to ride a horse through land your blood made possible." That quote went viral. The next day, the government blinked. Reed sent a follow-up email offering to relocate the 17A corridor route slightly. A 20-yard deviation, he said. A compromise. Emily read it and laughed. A 20-yard compromise on sacred land is like offering to burn just the edges of your wedding photo. We declined. Firmly. Then came the subpoenas. Reed was under investigation. Turns out Janice's documents had wider implications than we thought. The Office of Inspector General stepped in. Maddox's name popped up in federal records tied to the infrastructure project. What had started as a single HOA scam was now blowing the lid off a nationwide land grab scheme. It reached Capitol Hill. Senator Dolores Ray called again. "Jack," she said, "you're not just changing your fate. You're shifting the law." And we did. The Landowner Protection Act passed committee, then passed the Senate. The president signed it within 6 months. It now mandates federal agencies must provide full transparency, third-party land arbitration, and cannot pursue infrastructure projects through any private land without independent voter approval within the county. But even that wasn't the victory I remember most. It was the day a boy named Caleb, 12 years old, missing a front tooth and wearing dusty cowboy boots, walked up to me, hat in hand, and said, "Mr. Coleman, I want to be like you when I grow up. I want to fight for land like you do." I knelt down, looked him in the eye, and said, "You already are, son. Just don't ever let them tell you this dirt ain't worth defending." And that, more than any bill, any lawsuit, any drone shot down, or check torn in half, that's the real legacy. Because in the end, the land doesn't belong to the strongest. It belongs to the most stubborn, the ones who outlast the noise, stand through the fire, and plant their boots so deep into the soil that even time has to walk around them. That's who I am. And if you're reading this, if you've ever been told to sell, to shut up, to move along, then maybe that's who you are too. Let them come. We'll be waiting.